My name is Eleanor Martin. I am 70 years old. And if you have been following my story, you already know that I spent most of my life taking care of everyone else. You know about my childhood. You know about Sarah. You know about James. You know about Daniel and Emily. You know about the little house in Ohio. And you know about the photograph of the ocean house that James kept hidden in our bedroom drawer. But there was something I didn't know. Something hidden inside an old envelope in my attic. An envelope with my name on it. I had carried it downstairs the night before. I had placed it on the kitchen table. And all night long, I stared at it. I didn't open it. Not because I wasn't curious. I was terrified. Because sometimes the truth is easier to live without. Sometimes a person can spend decades building a peaceful version of the past. And then one letter can destroy it. At 7 the next morning, someone knocked on my door. 3 times. Slowly. Knock. 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 I froze. I looked toward the door. Nobody was supposed to visit. Sarah was 3 states away. Daniel was working. Emily was in New York. I walked toward the door. Then I looked back at the envelope on the table. For some reason, I felt that the 2 things were connected. I opened the door. And there stood a man I had never seen before. He was probably in his late 60s. Gray hair. Brown coat. A leather folder under his arm. He looked at me for a moment. Then he asked, "Are you Eleanor Martin?" I nodded. Yes. He took a slow breath. "My name is Thomas Reed." I frowned. "Do I know you?" He shook his head. "No." Then he looked over my shoulder. At the envelope on the kitchen table. His expression changed. "I see you found it." My heart stopped. "What?" He pointed toward the envelope. "That letter." I stared at him. "How do you know about that?" He looked at me. "Because I was asked to deliver it." The stranger at the door. I didn't invite him inside immediately. I stood in the doorway. "You knew my husband?" Thomas shook his head. "No." "My father?" "No." "My mother?" He hesitated. "Yes." I felt a strange chill move through me. "My mother." He nodded. "Margaret." I hadn't heard my mother's name spoken by a stranger in years. "How?" Thomas looked uncomfortable. "May I come in?" I stepped aside. He entered. He looked around the living room. Then he noticed the photograph of James. He walked toward it. "That man." "My husband." Thomas smiled faintly. "He looks familiar." I frowned. How could he look familiar? "I've seen photographs." "Where?" He didn't answer. Instead, he opened the leather folder. Inside were papers. Old photographs. Letters. And one small black and white picture. He placed it on the table. I picked it up. My mother was standing beside a young man. I stared. I recognized my mother. But I didn't recognize the man. "Who is he?" Thomas looked at me. "My father." I looked up. "What?" "My father knew your mother." I sat down. Suddenly, the room felt smaller. "What does this have to do with James?" Thomas was silent. Then he said, "Maybe nothing. Maybe. Or maybe everything. My mother's other life." Thomas explained that his father, Richard Reed, had worked with my grandfather many decades earlier. They had been involved in a small construction business. But there was more. Richard and Margaret had been friends. Very close friends. I felt uncomfortable hearing it. My mother was married. I know. My father loved her. Thomas looked down. I believe so. I stood up. Are you telling me my mother had another life? No. Then what are you telling me? That your mother had dreams. I stared at him. She had dreams. Yes. He handed me another photograph. It showed a small coastal house. The same house. The exact same house from James's photograph. I couldn't breathe. No. Thomas nodded. Yes. I sat down again. My mother knew about this place? Long before your husband did. I stared at the photograph. Why didn't she tell me? Maybe she wanted to. He reached into his folder. There is something else. He placed an old letter on the table. The handwriting was unmistakable. My mother's. Margaret's letter. My hands trembled as I opened it. The letter was written decades ago. It was addressed to me. Dear Eleanor, if you're reading this, then perhaps I never found the courage to tell you everything. I stopped. My eyes filled with tears. I continued. I always wanted you to believe that our little house was enough. And it was. But there was a part of me that always wanted to see the ocean. Your father knew. He promised that one day he would take me. Life got in the way. Money got in the way. Responsibilities got in the way. But the dream never disappeared. I looked at Thomas. My mother wanted to go to the ocean? He nodded. Yes. I continued reading. Eleanor, you are much more like me than you realize. You have always been the one who takes care of everyone. Please don't make my mistake. Don't wait until your life is almost over to discover that you had dreams too. I couldn't read anymore. I put the letter down. For years, I had thought the ocean dream belonged to James. But now I knew. It had belonged to my mother first. And somehow, it had passed from her to me. Sarah knows more than she said. I called Sarah immediately. She answered on the fourth ring. Eleanor. Sarah, what did Mom tell you about the ocean? Silence. That silence told me everything. You knew. Sarah sighed. Yes. I closed my eyes. How long? Since I was 17. Why didn't you tell me? Because Mom asked me not to. I felt angry. Why? Because she was afraid you would feel responsible for her unfinished dream. I sat quietly. Sarah continued. She didn't want you to spend your life trying to complete hers. I looked at the photograph. But I spent my whole life trying to complete everyone's dreams. Sarah laughed softly. That's exactly what Mom was afraid of. I smiled sadly. She knew me too well. She was your mother. We both became quiet. Then Sarah said, Eleanor. Yes. Maybe this isn't about Mom. What do you mean? Maybe she left the door open. For what? For you. The decision. That afternoon, I packed a small suitcase. Not because I was moving. Not yet. I simply wanted to see the place. Thomas offered to drive me. I refused. I can drive. He smiled. Still stubborn. I looked at him. How do you know that? My father knew your mother. I laughed. Apparently everyone knows my family better than I do. Thomas laughed. We drove north. The road became quieter. Trees surrounded us. The air changed. And eventually, I saw the ocean. I pulled the car over. I stepped outside. The wind hit my face. For a moment, I was 12 again. The girl staring at a magazine. The girl dreaming about the ocean. The girl who believed something beautiful was waiting somewhere beyond the horizon. I whispered, I'm here. The house. The house from the photograph was still there. It was smaller than I imagined. Blue shutters. White walls. A narrow porch. A garden that had clearly been neglected. I walked toward it. Thomas followed. Who owns it? He looked at me. That's complicated. Why? Because technically. He paused. It belonged to your mother. I stared at him. What? He nodded. Your mother bought it. When? Years ago. Why didn't she tell me? She never moved here. Why? Thomas handed me another document. She bought it with the intention of coming. I stared at the paper. The purchase date was almost 40 years old. I whispered. She was going to leave Ohio? Yes. And she didn't? No. Why? Thomas looked toward the ocean. Your father got sick. I closed my eyes. Of course. She stayed. She always stayed. The woman who always stayed. I stood on the porch. Suddenly, my entire childhood made sense. My mother had dreams. But she stayed. She stayed for my father. She stayed for Sarah. She stayed for me. She stayed for everyone. And then I had done the same. I had stayed for James. Then Daniel. Then Emily. Then everyone. I sat on the porch. Thomas sat beside me. I think I understand now. What? Why she never told me. He nodded. She didn't want you to repeat her life. I looked at the ocean. Maybe I already did. A new friend. The house needed repairs. A lot of repairs. The first person I met was a local handyman named Walter. He was 72. He wore overalls. He had a white beard. And he talked constantly. He looked at the house. Needs work. How much? Depends. On what? How much you hate money. I laughed. You're expensive. No. He smiled. I'm honest. Walter became one of my closest friends. He repaired the porch, fixed the windows, painted the shutters, and complained about everything. One morning, he saw me carrying a toolbox. Eleanor. Yes. Put that down. I can help. You're 70. So you're supposed to supervise. I laughed. Who made that rule? I did. Nora. Walter's daughter Nora worked at the local bakery. She was 32. She had recently divorced. She was raising a young son named Ben. Nora and I met because Walter brought me to the bakery. He said, "You need food." I said, "I know how to cook." He replied, "That's not what I said." Nora laughed. She gave me a blueberry pie. On the house. I protested. No. She smiled. Dad says you're stubborn. I looked at Walter. He says that about everyone. Nora laughed. Then you'll fit right in. Rosie enters my life. I met Rosie a few weeks later. She was 8. She had curly brown hair, a red backpack, and an endless number of questions. She knocked on my door. Are you the new lady? Yes. Are you old? I stared at her. Then I laughed. Yes. How old? 70. She thought about it. That's very old. I laughed harder. Thank you. You're welcome. Then she pointed inside. Do you have books? I smiled. Hundreds. Can I see them? Come in. And that was how Rosie entered my life. The library. Rosie loved books. Soon she brought friends. Then more children. I had an empty room. So I turned it into a small library. Walter built shelves. Nora donated chairs. Claire brought snacks. Mr. Harris, a retired teacher, volunteered to help. The room slowly changed. It became bright, warm, alive. Children laughed. They read. They argued about stories. They drew pictures. One day Rosie painted a sign. It said, Miss Ellie's Book House. I smiled. You spelled house wrong. She looked at it. Oh. Then she added another letter. Now it said, Miss Ellie's Book House. I laughed. Much better. Mr. Harris. Mr. Harris was 78. He had taught history for 40 years. He was serious. At least he pretended to be. One afternoon, Rosie asked, Mr. Harris, how old are you? 78. Do you remember dinosaurs? He stared at her. I wasn't born in the Jurassic period. Rosie looked disappointed. Oh. I laughed. Mr. Harris shook his head. Children have no respect. I said. Neither do you. He laughed. We became good friends. The Great Cookie Disaster. Claire decided to bake cookies for the children. Nora joined. I joined. This was a mistake. We made chocolate chip cookies. The first batch burned. The second batch was raw. The third batch somehow became both. Mr. Harris took one bite. He chewed. Then he said, I've eaten better rocks. We all burst out laughing. Rosie looked at him. Then don't eat them. He nodded. Excellent advice. Daniel calls. Meanwhile, Daniel called less often. When he did, conversations were short. How are you, Mom? Fine. Need anything? No. Okay. Okay. Then silence. One evening, he called. Mom. Yes. Are you really happy there? I looked around the room. At the books. At the photographs. At the ocean outside. Yes. He was quiet. Good. Then he hung up. I didn't know it yet. But Daniel had started asking questions about my past. Questions that would eventually bring him to Maine. Emily's visit. Emily came unexpectedly. She stood outside my door holding flowers. Mom. I hugged her. You didn't tell me you were coming. I wanted to surprise you. You succeeded. She looked around. You really built a library. I smiled. Apparently. She laughed. Then she saw the children. Rosie ran toward me. Miss Ellie. Emily smiled. Who's that? My friend. Rosie looked at Emily. Are you her daughter? Yes. Rosie looked at me. She looks like you. Emily laughed. I hope that's a compliment. Rosie nodded. It is. Emily's confession. That evening, Emily and I sat on the porch. She looked at the ocean. Mom. Yes. I wasn't happy in New York. I know. She looked surprised. How? I'm your mother. She laughed. I left because I thought I had to prove something. What? That I could succeed without anyone. I looked at her. You never had to prove that to me. I know that now. She leaned against my shoulder. I missed you. I missed you too. Then she asked, do you think we can start over? I smiled. We already have. Daniel's problem. A few months later, Daniel's business began struggling. He didn't tell me. I learned from Emily. I called him. What's happening? Nothing. Daniel. He sighed. Business is difficult. How difficult? Very. I didn't offer money. Not this time. Instead, I said, what do you need? He said, advice. I smiled. That was new. My son wasn't asking me to rescue him. He was asking me to listen. So I listened. For 2 hours. At the end, he said, thanks, Mom. I realized something. Sometimes helping someone doesn't mean fixing their problem. Sometimes it means letting them solve it themselves. The family road trip. Again. That summer, Daniel, Emily, Sarah, and I decided to take a road trip. It reminded me of the old days. Except now everyone was older. And nobody wanted to admit they needed the bathroom. 3 hours into the trip, Sarah said. Stop the car. Daniel said. Why? I need a bathroom. Emily laughed. Sarah shouted. I'm serious. I laughed so hard I cried. We stopped. Then Daniel got lost. He blamed the GPS. The GPS blamed him. We argued. Then we found a diner. It reminded me of the place where James and I met. I stared at the counter. Sarah noticed. You're thinking about him. Yes. She smiled. He would have loved this trip. I laughed. He would have complained about the food. Definitely. The old diner. The diner owner recognized the name Martin. He looked at me. James Martin. My heart stopped. Yes. He smiled. He used to come here. I stared at him. When? Years ago. Why? The owner disappeared into the back. He returned holding an old notebook. This belonged to him. I opened it. Inside were notes, dates, addresses, names, and one sentence. If Eleanor ever comes here, give her the blue envelope. I stared at Sarah. What blue envelope? The owner smiled. I have no idea. My hands began trembling. The same mystery. Another envelope. Another secret. Another piece of James's past. The blue envelope. We returned to Maine. I couldn't stop thinking about the notebook. The next morning, Thomas came to the house. I showed him the notebook. He read the sentence. His face changed. What? He looked at me. Eleanor, you need to be careful. Why? Because your husband wasn't the only person searching for that property. I stared at him. What do you mean? He closed the notebook. Someone else wanted it. Who? He didn't answer. Thomas. He looked toward the ocean. Your mother's old business partner. I frowned. My mother had a business partner? Yes. Who? Thomas hesitated. His name was Richard. I stared at him. Richard Reed. He nodded. My father. I felt dizzy. Your father. Yes. But why would he want the property? Thomas looked at me. Because it was never just a house. The old agreement. Thomas finally told me the truth. The property had once been part of a larger plan. My mother and Richard had wanted to create a small community center near the ocean. A place where families could gather. A place for children. A place for older people who were alone. A place where people could feel they belonged. My mother had called it the Harbor House. I stared at him. That sounds exactly like what I built with the library. Thomas smiled. Maybe that's why you were drawn here. I shook my head. No. What? I wasn't drawn here. I looked at the ocean. I was brought here. The old house. We returned to the house. Thomas showed me a hidden storage room. Behind an old wooden panel was a small metal box. Inside was a document. My mother's signature. Richard's signature. And James's signature. I stared. James knew. Thomas nodded. When? Years ago. Why didn't he tell me? I don't know. I read the document. The plan was simple. The property was supposed to become a community center. But the project had never happened. My mother had abandoned it. Richard had moved away. And James had apparently found the documents decades later. I sat down. James hadn't simply dreamed of an ocean house. He had discovered my mother's unfinished dream. And he had been trying to bring it back to life. The second letter. That night, I opened the envelope I had found in Ohio. This time, I couldn't stop myself. Inside was a letter from James. Eleanor. If you're reading this, then I failed to tell you something while I was alive. I found out about your mother's dream. I found the property. I wanted to take you there. Not because I wanted to give you a house. Because I wanted to give you a life where you didn't have to spend every day taking care of everyone else. I wanted one place where you could simply be Eleanor. If I never get the chance to take you there, please go anyway. Don't wait for me. I couldn't breathe. I held the letter against my chest. James had known. He had understood me. Even when I didn't understand myself. The Harbor House. The next morning, I called everyone. Sarah came. Emily came. Daniel came. Claire came. Rosie came. Mr. Harris came. Nora came. Walter came. I placed the documents on the table. This place was supposed to become something. Rosie looked around. What? I smiled. A home for people who need one. Daniel looked at me. What are you thinking? I looked at the empty room. I want to finish what my mother started. Sarah smiled. Emily took my hand. Daniel nodded. I'll help. Claire smiled. So will I. Walter raised his hand. I'll build. Nora said. I'll bake. Mr. Harris said. I'll teach. Rosie raised her hand. I'll read. Everyone laughed. I wiped a tear from my eye. For the first time. The dream didn't feel impossible. It felt close. The first day of work. The renovation began. Walter arrived at 7 in the morning. I arrived at 6:30. He looked offended. You're trying to beat me? Yes. Why? Because you're 72. He laughed. So are you. Exactly. We worked together. Daniel fixed the electrical system. Emily organized donations. Sarah painted. Claire cleaned. Nora brought food. Mr. Harris sorted books. Rosie wrote labels. It became a family project. There was dust everywhere. Paint on the floor. Boxes in every room. And laughter. So much laughter. The surprise. One afternoon, I found Daniel standing alone in the hallway. He was looking at an old photograph of James. I walked toward him. What are you doing? He wiped his eyes. Nothing. I smiled. You're crying. No. Daniel. He laughed. Fine. He looked at the photograph. I miss Dad. So do I. I wish he could see this. I touched his shoulder. Maybe he can. He smiled. Then he said, Mom. Yes. I think Dad would be proud of you. I looked at the photograph. I hope so. The first opening. Months later, Harbor House was ready. It wasn't perfect. Some paint was uneven. One window didn't close properly. Walter insisted it was character. The library had hundreds of books. There was a small kitchen, a garden, a reading room, a room for older neighbors, and a large wooden sign outside. The Harbor House. The first day, dozens of people arrived. Children, parents, older people, neighbors, everyone. Rosie stood beside me. Miss Ellie. Yes. Are you happy? I looked around. At Daniel, Emily, Sarah, Claire, Nora, Mr. Harris, Walter. At the children laughing. At the ocean beyond the windows. Yes. She smiled. Good. The letter from the past. That evening, after everyone left, I sat alone. I opened the final document Thomas had given me. It contained one sentence. The property must remain in the Martin family. I frowned. Why? Why was that important? Then I noticed a second page. A name was written there. A name I had never seen. David Martin. I froze. My father's name was Thomas Martin. My grandfather's name was David. But this document referred to someone else. Someone connected to my family. Someone who had been involved with the property. Someone whose story I had never heard. I called Sarah. Sarah. Yes. Do you know who David Martin was? She was silent. Then she whispered. Eleanor. What? I think there's something Mom never told us. My heart began beating faster. What? Sarah took a breath. David wasn't just our grandfather. I waited. He had another child. I stared into the darkness. Another child? Yes. Who? Sarah's voice became quiet. I don't know. I looked at the old document again. The name David Martin was written across the top. And beneath it, Another name. A name I had never seen before. A name that would connect my family to the harbor house and change everything I thought I knew about my parents. I stood up. Outside, the ocean was dark. The waves crashed against the shore. And suddenly, the house didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt like it was waiting for me to uncover something that had been buried for more than half a century. I looked at James's photograph. "You knew," I whispered. Then I looked at my mother's old letter. "You knew too." I had spent 70 years believing I knew my family. But perhaps I had only known the parts they wanted me to know. And the next morning, when Thomas returned with another old box, he said 4 words that made my blood run cold. "Your uncle is alive." I stared at him. "My uncle?" Thomas nodded. "The brother nobody told you about." And suddenly, the story of my life took another turn. Because the family secret buried beneath the harbor house wasn't finished with me yet. To be continued.